sure, but my brain tells me I've been here before. Don't wanna draw any attention to all the crazy things that I shouldn't mention. Not really sure, but
Hey guys, Aussie Beaut here, and today I'm going to be showing you guys how to wire a 12-volt cigarette lighter like this onto a constant line with a switch so that you can turn it on and off with a flick of a switch. This can be useful for a variety of different things. Not only does it give you more 12-volt accessibility so you can plug more things in, but the reasons why I've done it is there's mainly three reasons. One, so I can run my dash cam while my car's turned off. The key's taken out the ignition completely. Another reason is so I can run a 12-volt light like this. And the third reason was so I could charge my phone, so if I was to go camping or go into the shops or something, so I could charge my phone inside my car without the keys having to be in the ignition. It's fairly helpful. Now in this tutorial, I've actually already wired it, so I can't actually show you guys me wiring it all together and doing all that, but what I can show you is one step better, which is this instruction manual on what I just wrote up then, basically on how I did it. So the main concepts here are you've got the battery, you've got the cigarette port itself. In this video, I'm going to call it a unit, because the 12-volt cigarette port, it's a tongue twister. I suck at saying it, and I change the name every time. You've got the rocker switch, and you've also got a bit of a legend on what everything is. So here, you've got the grounding points, and that's what there and there. They're the grounding points. You've got your black 15 amp wire, which is what I used in this. So that's all the black wires. So these ones here. Same goes with the red. So with the wiring, I like to keep it positive is the red wire and that the negative is the black wire. Here is my diagram that I've drawn up. I know it works because constantly at the moment the key is not in the ignition, as you can see. I've got my 12-volt light, got my GPS on, and I've also got my dash cam plugged in. So as you can see, it's got the wiring from the battery, it's got the wiring from the relay to the rocker switch and from the port itself. So how I've wired it all under here, and with a flick of my wrist and some horrible editing, the boot that covers the gear stick and the low range stick has now majestically lifted up and has exposed all the wiring, how I've done. As you can see there, I've got my 30 amp relay. I'll go through all of the wiring, all the relay as well, what I used, all the bits that I used and everything, and I'll basically give you guys a bit of a rundown. So for starters, we're going to be looking at the diagram that I drew up itself, because, well, this is exactly what I've done in my vehicle and no differences whatsoever. But don't worry, I'll physically go through and show you guys how I've done everything in my car as well, where I've mounted everything and so on. So first off, we'll actually start at the unit itself. I didn't have to do this in my diagram, which I highly recommend you do a diagram whenever you're doing any wiring. But yeah, in my diagram, I've actually done like all the positives and the negatives, like wires coming from there. You don't have to do that. But but anyway, so the positive wire that's coming from here goes up to the 30 on the relay, and I'll go through all the bits and all the wiring stuff that you'll need to like after this, so don't worry. And then from the second part of that, you're going to get the negative wire, which is the black wire, and then you're going to want to trace it up, and then you're going to want to connect it to the 85 wire, which then comes off of the relay 85, and then it basically goes to a ground. So basically, I'll show you that as well, but what actually happens is the 85 wire is a ground wire from the relay. So I figured, hey, what the hell, if they're both going towards the ground, I may as well merge them into one wire. How I did that, I put a slit in the 85 wire that's going across there, and then I soldered the negative wire from the actual unit into the 85 wire. It's a lot simple. I'll show you guys in like physical person. And now we're going to be looking at the 87, which is the battery. And for that, basically all you're going to want to do is you want to get a red 15 amp wire, which is I've like to color code it, so positive is red, as I've said before, and that's going to go up through to a 15 amp inline fuse, so a medium sized blade fuse, and that's going to go to your positive. I'll tell you in a second why I've actually put a 15 amp fuse in there. Most people say you're crazy, you don't need to do that, but I'll explain why I've actually done that in a bit. Next, we're going to be doing the center of the rocker switch. So what I've actually done here, by the way, guys, if you can't actually see, I've tried to make it as easy for myself as possible. So what I've done is on paint here, which I've drawn up this diagram on, I've made the rocker switch almost identical to the rocker switches that I'm actually using. This rocker switches are great. I picked this up from Super Cheap or BCF. I actually picked them up from both. That one was from BCF, those two were from Super Cheap. They're exactly the same. They're Hunter ones, and they work amazing because of these here. so you can actually just screw them in at the back there. So you drill a hole, put it through, screw it in, and then you're set, and they don't move. So the center of it is going to be going down to the 86 on your relay. And then lastly, we'll go over the rocker switch itself. So start off, we're going to go through the top prong, which is down here. So that's this one here, the top prong, right on top. That is going to go to the ground, and I'll show you that in the physical. And what I've done here is I've actually said read figure 1. It basically says if the rocker switch grounding does not work, or you cannot find a suitable grounding point to the negative on the battery as the dotted line shows. And that's basically this line here. So basically, if this grounding point doesn't work, or you can't find a grounding point, just forget the grounding point and then hook it to the battery instead, to the negative. And then it says otherwise you don't have to worry about connecting the ground to the battery. That's basically what I've just said. And last off, we're going to be connecting the bottom one, the bottom prong, up into the power 87 line, which connects to your battery. And that's going to be connecting power through into your rocker switch and actually giving power to the rocker switch. So then when you flick the switch, it sends power back out to the 86 and to the rest of the unit. And that there, guys, is so simple. That is a basic diagram on how I've actually set up mine. But before I talk about wiring through the vehicle, I'm just going to be talking about a relay a bit. So here I've actually got myself a 30 amp relay with a 30 amp fuse poking out the top. I was originally going to go with like a 15 amp one, but they didn't have any in stock. So I said, well, screw it. I'm just going to go with a 30 amp. And it's the same with the wiring as well, as I'll show you right now. So originally, looking at the drawage rate of the unit that I just put in my car, it's a 10 amp drawage rate. So I was going to go with 10 amp gauge wire. But I decided to scrap that idea at the end, and I decided to up it one more to 15 gauge wire. I just did that as a precaution. You guys don't have to. You could probably get away with the 10 amp, but I just used it as a precaution. I didn't want any wires burning or anything like that. So I figured, screw it. I'm going with a 30 amp relay. Just going to up it to a 15 amp wire as well, just a bit larger. Little bit of advice as well, guys. If you get any wire, any excess wire from, I don't know, pulling stuff out your car and stuff, always do keep it. Not so you can make a nice spaghetti dish like I have here, but so that you can actually use it as scrap wire, because you never know, you'll be going through your car and you'll think, oh, I need 10 gauge wire. Well, here I've got a good few meters of 10 gauge wire that I pulled off of one of my light bars, factory harness kits that I got from it. So yeah, that'll be always good to use in the future. While we're here, guys, I'm just going to open up my tackle box. I'm going to show you all the parts that I used. So here I'm just basically going to be going over the fuses and the kind of terminals that I've used. I've just gone over the wiring, so I'm using 15 amp wiring. So basically here we have our blade terminal. Now this is red, so this is suited for smaller gauge wiring, like 10 gauge, as you can see, because the hole in there is very, very, very small. And I'm not going to lie, guys, I purchased the red blade terminals, and then the last minute decided that I wanted to change the gauge of my wire. So trying to fit 15 gauge wire in one of these was a pain in the backside, but it worked eventually. It was a lot harder than it had to be. Yeah, if you're gonna actually up your wiring to higher, like 15 amp wiring, definitely go with one of your blues. As you can see, they do come in different sizes, so the blue is just a bit wider and you'll be able to fit your wiring in there a bit more. And those red blade terminals, I used them on both my actual relay itself and on the rocker switch to connect all the wiring to the rocker switch, as you can see there, all the way down. All three of those are the red blade ones, which I just showed you. Next, we're going to be going over this blue ring terminal, and this is basically for connecting your actual line to the positive. And as you can see there, that's where I've used it. It works fairly well. It bends a bit, which is very lucky because, yeah, my wiring is not the best. Next up, we're going to be using the 15 amp fuse, and that is going to be coming off of this wire here, like I've shown in the diagram, coming from the battery straight into here. This is a fuse holder that I'm deciding to use. Don't mind all my wiring, by the way, guys. I'll get around to cleaning it up one day. Probably not. And yeah, it's just in here. Rightio, so there's your 15 amp fuse right in there, and make sure this is in a waterproof container as well, because you know it's under the bonnet, so water might get in. Basically, why I put a 15 amp fuse in is what I'm going to explain now. Is because that relay in there already has a 30 amp fuse in it. So if there was going to be a surge of power that was to blow a few fuses, it would blow this 15 amp fuse and not the 30 amp fuse in there. This is good for me because I'm running really low on 30 amp fuses. As you can see, I've got a few 30 amp fuses, not too many. Whereas compared to my 15 amp fuses, I've got a lot more. That's one upside, and plus the other upside to it is if it blows this fuse, it means all I have to do is pop the hood and then, you know, just open this, replace a fuse in there, instead of having to go in there, pull the interior apart, take the fuse out, and then, yeah, so it'll save you a bit of time as well. Then we're going to be going over the 30 amp fuse, which you stick in your relay. Like so, as you can see here, it just sticks right into the actual relay itself. So that's the 30 amp fuse there. So that's just going over kind of the smaller bits, like your fuses and stuff. Now for kind of larger, more expensive bits, you're going to want to get a kind of large blade fuse holder like I have here. Support a 15 amp fuse or whatever fuse you're using, which will suit your relay. You're going to want to get a rocker switch, or in my case, I decided to do my light bar rewiring as well while I was here, so you're going to want to get a few in that case. But I got these ones here, which are Hansa ones. They're very inexpensive and they are really easy to install, and I like the look of them. And then you're going to want to get your relay, and depending on where you get it from, your relay can vary from about $10 to $15. Yeah, apart from that, they're very good, and I think they make wiring a lot easier. Alrighty-o, so now that we've done all that, we're going to get into the process of how I actually wired everything into my vehicle.